Have you ever wondered what happens when you start seeing too much? When the world, which once seemed solid and coherent, begins to unravel before your eyes, revealing layers of lies, vanity, and fear that most choose to ignore, there comes a point where the simple act of seeing becomes dangerous. Not because vision is bad, but because it destroys the comfort of unconsciousness, and few are willing to lose that comfort in the name of truth. Carl Jung said that no tree can grow to the sky without its roots reaching into hell. And perhaps that's exactly what happens when you wake up. You begin to see what's hidden in yourself, in others, in society. You begin to realize that laughter is a disguise, that love is an escape, that morality is a charade. And then you understand, most people don't want to see. They want to keep dreaming, but you can't anymore. You try to go back to sleep, but something inside you refuses. It's as if there's a silent calling, a force whispering, see, understand, accept. And the more you see, the more you realize that awakening isn't a choice. It's an inevitable, painful, and beautiful process. You feel the weight of lucidity, the weariness of carrying truths that no one wants to hear. And yet, something inside you refuses to close your eyes again. This video is for those who have already felt this, for those who look around and perceive the abyss between what is real and what is interpreted, for those who walk awake amidst a crowd that is still asleep. Seeing too much is dangerous, but it's also the first step to truly seeing. If this message resonates with you, check if you are already subscribed to the channel, because here we talk about what almost no one dares to say. And tell me in the comments, do you also feel like you see too much? I really want to know. Oh, and leave a like. That's what keeps this space of consciousness alive. And when you start to see what others don't see, the surrounding silence becomes deafening. It's like walking through a ghost town. Everything seems the same, but something is missing, a kind of dead glow in the conversations, the gestures, the intentions. You try to talk about what you've noticed, try to explain what has changed inside you, but the words sound strange, out of place, almost forbidden. People look at you with that look of someone who doesn't understand, or worse, who doesn't want to understand. To see the invisible is to carry a burden that cannot be shared. You begin to see the motivations hidden in smiles, the pain disguised in jokes, the fears masked by arrogance. It's a kind of vision that doesn't switch off, that doesn't ask permission, and little by little, you understand that there is a price to pay for having eyes that truly see. The price is loneliness. Jung called this the individuation process, the moment when a human being begins to separate from collective illusions and look inward, without filters, without excuses. It's the point where you cease to be part of the mass and become an isolated consciousness. The ego struggles, tries to resist, tries to return to the comfort of the known, but it's useless. Awakening is irreversible. Once you see, you can no longer unsee, and that's the burden. Knowing too much about what nobody wants to know, feeling too much where most only react, seeing the fragility of the masks, the fragility of the truths that sustain the world. And even if it hurts, even if everything inside you wants to close its eyes, something insists on continuing to look, because seeing is also loving reality, even when it is imperfect, even when it is brutal. Seeing is the most sincere way to exist. Awakening rarely arrives as a moment of peace. It approaches like a rupture, a silent collapse that destroys everything you thought you were. There is no warning, no preparation. One day, something inside you simply collapses, and what once seemed solid reveals itself to be fragile, illusory, built upon layers of inherited beliefs and fears disguised as certainties. It is the beginning of an inner birth, painful, confusing, but inevitable. You begin to realize that everything you called normal life was just a collective charade. People pretending to know where they're going, pretending to be okay, pretending to understand the meaning, and suddenly you can't pretend anymore. The mask slips, the role no longer fits, and the old script makes no sense. What remains is a void, the raw space between who you were and who you don't yet know how to be. This emptiness is frightening because it demands courage. It demands that you walk without maps, without guarantees, without applause. The ego screams, trying to hold on to what is falling apart, trying to keep the old identity alive. But the process has already begun. Jung said that awakening is not about becoming good, but about becoming whole. And that includes accepting the shadow, the chaos, the parts that the world taught you to reject. Each new perception is a small death, You die to the lie, you die to appearances, you die to the comfort of ignorance. But amidst so many deaths, something new is born, something more real, more silent, more lucid. Awakening is the end of an illusion, but also the birth of a gaze that finally sees what has always been there. And when that gaze awakens, nothing is ever the same again. The world remains the same, yes, but you don't. Knowing too much is a kind of condemnation disguised as enlightenment. There comes a point where knowledge ceases to liberate and begins to isolate. When you understand the subtle workings of the mind, the power games in relationships, the lies that underpin human certainties, something within you changes forever. You become an observer, and the observer rarely belongs to what he observes. The paradox lies there. The more conscious you become, the more you perceive the distance between you and the world. It's like watching a play where everyone acts with passion, believing in every line, while you backstage understand that it's just a script. There is beauty in illusion, yes, but there is also pain in knowing that it is an illusion. Knowledge, when profound, demands the price of innocence. Carl Jung said that knowledge illuminates everything, even the darkness within us, and it is at this point that many give up, because perceiving one's own shadow requires more courage than remaining ignorant. Most prefer the sweetness of lies to the bitterness of lucidity. To see is to lose innocence, and to lose innocence is to lose rest. But perhaps true awakening lies in this: learning to remain awake even when it hurts, not running from awareness, not denying what is revealed, understanding that knowledge is not a ladder to heaven, but a bridge over the abyss, a constant crossing between the human and the divine, between the ego and the soul. And in this journey, something within you matures. You stop searching for answers and begin to endure questions. You stop seeking comfort and start accepting the truth as it is, naked, uncomfortable, but real. If you understand this paradox, if you've ever felt the weight of knowing too much, comment, "I see too much down here." I want to know how many of you still have the courage to keep looking. Loneliness is the inevitable price of awakening. When you begin to see clearly, the world starts to recede. It's not that people reject you. It's that you can no longer participate in the same charade. Common topics lose their flavor. Conversations seem to revolve around absences, and smiles sound like echoes of something that no longer exists. You try to fit in, try to laugh at the same jokes, feign the same enthusiasm, but inside you something remains quiet, observing. A silence that is not emptiness but awareness. It is in this silence that you discover the strange truth. Awakening separates you, but also connects you with something much greater. While the world sleeps in noise, you awaken in silence. The crowd rushes by, but you begin to walk slowly, almost like someone meditating among ruins. And the more you walk, the more you realize you are alone, not as punishment, but by destiny. Awakening is a solitary process, because no one can open your eyes for you. Jung said that the path to individuation is the path of creative isolation. It is in this isolation that the soul finds its reflection. You begin to understand that solitude is not the absence of company, but the presence of oneself. There is a tragic beauty in this, the pain of not belonging and the freedom of not needing to belong. Solitude becomes a kind of temple, an inner space where you finally listen to yourself. But the mind, accustomed to the noise, tries to escape. It seeks company, distraction, noise, but none of these fill the void that has been broken, because the emptiness that awakening leaves behind is not an emptiness of lack, but of space, the space where the new can be born. And when you understand, this solitude ceases to be a punishment and becomes a sign, a silent reminder that being alone is the price of being conscious, and that paradoxically, in this state of separation, you have never been so close to the whole. There's a moment on the path to awakening when your gaze, tired of observing the world, turns inward, and that's where everything truly begins. You realize that what you saw outside was always just a reflection of what was inside you. Every person, every situation, every conflict, mirrors projecting parts of yourself that you didn't yet want to see. The other was never the enemy. The other was always the mirror. The process is brutal and liberating at the same time. Looking inward, you find chaos. You find old fears, forgotten shames, impulses that the mind tried to bury under masks of morality. Jung called this a confrontation with the shadow, the inevitable encounter with what we reject in ourselves. And this is where many stop, because there is nothing more uncomfortable than seeing your own face without the layers of identity that the ego has built. But the mirror doesn't judge. It only shows. It shows that love and hate are born from the same source, that good and evil are merely polarities of the same energy. You realize there's nothing to fight, only parts of yourself waiting to be integrated. The soul doesn't seek purity, it seeks wholeness, and to be whole, you must embrace even what frightens you. The reflection begins to change when you stop. Running away, fear when looked at honestly dissolves. Anger when understood reveals pain, and pain when accepted transforms into presence. The inner mirror is the silent master. It doesn't speak, it doesn't teach, it only reflects. And in that reflection, you find the truth. Everything that irritates you in others is what you haven't yet recognized in yourself. Gradually, the battle subsides. The mirror ceases to be an enemy and becomes a portal. What once seemed like a confrontation becomes communion. You begin to see the divine even in your shadows, and you understand finally that true awakening is not seeing the light, it's learning to see in the darkness. The truth isn't gentle, it cuts. It tears through illusions with the precision of an ancient blade. Therefore, most prefer not to touch it. It's easier to remain distracted, to stay within the comfortable narrative, to believe that chaos is order and that pain is merely chance. But there comes a moment when the soul tires of the lie, and at that instant, the risk begins. Because seeing the truth means losing the protection of ignorance and never being able to sleep again. You begin to realize that truth isn't just in books or theories, but in the subtext of life itself. It's in the silences no one hears, in the repetitions you insist on living, in the words you don't say, and in the emotions you avoid feeling. Truth isn't knowledge, it's a revelation, and revelations by their very nature require courage. Jung said that truth is a necessary danger. It destroys everything that is not real, and that is why it hurts. But it is this pain that cleanses, that purifies, that opens space for the new. When you face the truth, the ego begins to crumble. Certainties dissolve, social roles lose meaning, and what remains is only what is authentic. At that moment, there is fear, but there is also life. Because to live in truth is to be in direct contact with reality, naked and untamed. Many talk about seeking the truth, but few understand what that truly means. Seeking the truth is about stripping yourself bare. It's about accepting being seen by your own eyes. It's about allowing the light to reveal the parts you've tried to hide for so long. There is no glory in this process, only humility. There are tears, there is silence, there is rebirth. And when you finally see it, you realize that the truth was never hidden. You were just too distracted to notice it. It was always there, waiting for you to have the courage to face it without running away. If you feel you've already faced that risk, if you've already confronted truth that changed everything inside you, comment, "I choose to see." I want to know how many still have the courage to look, even when it hurts. After you see the truth, there's no avoiding the abyss. It opens before you, vast, silent, inescapable. It's not a physical place, but a state of the soul. It's the space where everything you believed yourself to be begins to dissolve. The abyss is the mirror without reflection, the point where the self loses its boundaries and the world loses its forms. And there, in the darkness, you are confronted not with external demons, but with the absence of everything that defined you. The first reaction is fear, the impulse to flee, to return to the surface, to cling to something familiar. But the more you try to escape, the more the abyss calls to you. It wants you to surrender, to stop fighting, to trust. Because the abyss is not punishment, it is initiation. It is the silent rite that separates the awakened from the dreamer. Jung said that whoever looks outside dreams, whoever looks inside awakens. And that's exactly what happens when you cross the abyss. You stop projecting evil onto the world and begin to recognize it within yourself. You discover that the shadows are not enemies, but exiled parts of your own essence, asking for reconciliation. The abyss teaches you to see without judgment, to feel without resistance, to exist without masks. And then something changes. The fear begins to dissolve, not because the danger has disappeared, but because you have understood it. The darkness ceases to be a threat and transforms into fertile ground. What once seemed empty reveals itself as creative space. From nothing, a new presence emerges, calm, silent, firm. You realize that the abyss never wanted to swallow you. It only wanted to transform you. When you finally return, the world is the same, But your perspective is not. You move differently. You speak with less haste. You listen more deeply. There is a serenity that did not exist before, as if something inside you had died and been reborn lucid. Many believe that awakening is a destination, a finish line. But with time you realize that awakening is a cycle, an infinite spiral that repeats itself at ever deeper levels. There is no such thing as being awake. There is only continuing to awaken. Consciousness is not a fixed state. It is a constant movement between clarity and forgetfulness, light and shadow, expansion and contraction. And in this movement, the soul refines itself, shedding increasingly subtle layers of illusion. With each new cycle, you get a little lost again, confused again, afraid again. And that's not failure, it's part of the process. The ego, with its need for control, believes that awakening means remaining lucid forever. But the truth is that consciousness moves like the sea. It advances, it recedes, it breathes. There are days when you feel everything clearly, and days when everything seems to return to the fog. The secret lies in not identifying with either clarity or confusion, but with the one who observes both. Jung said that the human being is a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, and this crossing never ends. Every time you face a new shadow, something within you expands. Every time you fall, something within you learns to rise more lightly. That's why awakening is so paradoxical. The more you understand, the more you realize how much you still ignore. True wisdom is not knowing, it's accepting the mystery. Over time, you begin to see beauty even in pain. You understand that falls are also invitations to descend deeper, and you realize that each return to the abyss is in fact a return to the center, the silent point within you that is never lost. Awakening is remembering this point always. Life then ceases to be a sequence of achievements and becomes a dance between forgetting and remembering. And perhaps the true awakening is not about leaving the dream, but learning to dream consciously, with eyes open. After crossing the abyss, something within you changes forever. You don't become enlightened. You don't become perfect, just more real. Integration is not an end, it's a reconciliation. It's when the parts that once fought within you finally recognize each other as one. Light and shadow cease to be enemies. Past and present stop fighting. The self that sought answers understands that the path itself was the answer. You begin to realize that awakening doesn't separate you from the world. It returns you to it, but in a different way. Now you inhabit it with greater presence. Every simple gesture becomes a sacred act. Breathing, walking, looking someone in the eyes, consciousness transforms the everyday into ritual, and silence, once solitary, becomes companionship. Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the essence of integration, accepting what is without needing to correct, deny, or flee. The mature soul no longer wants to conquer life, it wants to dance with it. It understands that suffering is not punishment, it is language. That love is not an ideal, it is practice. That awakening is not an arrival, it is a constant and gentle return to the center of oneself. You still feel the world's pain, but now it doesn't consume you. You observe it with compassion. The ego still whispers, but you no longer believe everything it says. Fear still appears, but it no longer paralyzes you. You've learned to walk with it, and in this walk, a silent, almost invisible serenity is born, the kind of peace that depends on nothing, only on being awake. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is also awakening. So subscribe to the channel. This space is made for minds that see beyond the obvious. Comment, I woke up here below, so I know you stayed until the end and are part of this collective awakening. Leave a like. This helps to keep this journey of awareness alive. And now, watch the next video. That is appearing on the screen, because the awakening doesn't end here. It just continues.